today, this evening podcast, and we have our guest, Dr. Mirza Zulfiqur Rahman. So, Dr. Mirza is a doctorate in developmental sciences from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences of IIT Guwahati. He has also has done his post graduation in international relations and diplomacy from Jawaharlal Nehru University of India, and his graduations in political science from the Hindu College. His area of expertise and the main interest area as far as his research is concerned includes Northeast India, and specifically the issues related to transboundary water sharing, hydropower dams, roads and connectivity infrastructures, conflict and insurgency, peace building, developmental politics, and migration and cross-border exchanges related, that crucial geopolitical issues as well as social and sustainability issues are his main area of work. And not just that, he has done his research work on issues like border issues in Northeast India. We know that how crucial actually from geopolitical as well as many social point of view that part of our country. And he has also have expertise in transboundary water sharing and management issues between three countries: India, Bangladesh, and China. So this is the overall background of the academic and the professional background of Dr. Mirza. And Dr. Mirza, as far as our today's evening's podcast is concerned, uh, just to set the context, that more than a year back, I wrote that book, Pseudo Ecotourism in the Shadow of the Bengal Tiger. And in that book, I kind of introduced a concept called inclusive ecotourism. Now, what do you mean by that? I mean, we all understand that ecotourism as an activity is definitely main intention is recreation and entertainment, but at the same time, recreation and entertainment are not the only thing about ecotourism. The overarching purposes of ecotourism are creating opportunity to experience authenticity of the nature and also generate awareness about ecosystems. And when we add this prefix inclusive before the word ecotourism, uh, by that what I try to kind of narrate, that we can only achieve these overarching purposes of ecotourism if we are not biased about a single species. For example, Bengal tiger, if we are ready to include all kind of species which are there in the nature, and at the same time we are not biased for a particular ecosystems, we are ready to include all kind of ecosystems. Like we don't want to see only rainforest, but we also want to see the desert ecosystem, because everything has their own unique features. Not just that, Dr. Mirza, I mean, not just non-human life form, even the human also has a role to play when you say inclusive ecotourism, especially indigenous people and the forest dwellers. We know about their contribution in sustainability. Their way of living actually is way more sustainable than we urban people can think about. Their contribution for conserving nature. We know about Bishnois of Jodhpur, who live sustainably and protect nature and wildlife. We know about Dongria Kont tribes of Odisha, who actually won legal battle against powerful corporate and prevented mineral mining in Niyamgiri Hills and protected that forest and all the animals living there and all the forms of life living there. You and I, in last couple of years, traveled together extensively in northeast part of the country with our few other friends. For example, Apatanis of Zero Valley in Arunachal Pradesh. We know about their sustainable way of living and their contribution. In fact, UNESCO recognized them as one of the sustainable tribal group. We also traveled together in the Konyak headhunter tribals in the remotest part of Nagaland, and we have witnessed actually their sustainable way of living and their contribution to protect nature. So, Dr. Mirza, as an expert, actually subject matter expert of Northeast India as well as indigenous people, we like to start our this evening conversation uh, by hearing few words from you about what you think about that the indigenous people's contribution in general in sustainability especially, and whether there is a potential actually to develop ecotourism around them.
Thank you so much, Arnab, for inviting me to this podcast. I've been following this for several weeks, that it has started since last year. And have followed it with a lot of interest, and I've read your book as well, which you had presented to me last year. And it has several stories from where you have traveled around the world, and also particularly various parts of India. And that also includes various parts of Northeast India, which we have also together traveled at some points. And it is very interesting to that you actually bring about this concept of inclusive ecotourism. First, I just wanted to actually, uh, you know, break out the concept of ecotourism first, in a
Sure.
sense, in terms of how we understand tourism. And we, it's a very used and abused term, ecotourism, where the eco sometimes goes out of the picture, and sometimes a lot of other things are happening in the name of ecotourism. And a lot of people are using ecotourism to actually, without understanding the real value of ecotourism, a real meaning of ecotourism. A lot of people also use different names to what actually is ideally meant by ecotourism. Those are, for example, community-based tourism, and also community-driven tourism, and community-inclusive tourism. And that is where inclusive tourism comes in. There are several stakeholders to tourism industry, and tourism industry can also be a very ruthless industry. In terms of tourism as a activity, many people think it is a very innocent activity, but it is not so innocent activity, in a sense that, you know, we are also doing a lot of unmindfully, a lot of things which may be detrimental to communities, detrimental to nature, and detrimental to the environment.
Yeah.
And also a lot of things are deployed, and there are many demands of tourism, for example. But how do we actually bring in inclusive ecotourism is to not see it as a sector which the government actually determines on the ground. It is to be a sector where all the stakeholders of a tourism industry needs to get together and understand the pros and cons of tourism, and then be able to bring together a consultation where a particular community, an indigenous community, for example, in any tribal area of India, for example, opens up their landscape to tourism. It has to be also on the based on the indigenous knowledge systems and the traditional knowledge systems that these communities have been knowing for a long period of time. And that is something that we also need to learn. Um, Usually governments and tourism departments do not really look at that and come with a very top-down and top-heavy kind of a tourism, where a community-based and a community-driven tourism actually brings in this kind of, it is what I understand is they are opening up their space, they're opening up their homes, they're opening up their villages, and their and it is also to be in their own terms, because when a particular space is opened up, it also opens up the ecology of the space. It also opens up the social relations of the space, the cultural relations of the space. It's children, it's women, and a lot of it's elderly. A lot of things are at stake. So, unless and until the community has an active role in how the terms and conditions of such tourism and such opening up will actually mean, it will not be on a very, very equal footing, a community driven and a community based tourism. And hence, it cannot be given the tag of ecotourism. I'll give you an example of Sundarbans, where several years ago, I was participating in a consultative workshop, which was done in the island of Kumirmari in Sundarbans, where the local, association, which was also involved in tourism, was actually giving a charter of demands, a charter of demands to the government and the tourism department, that this is the community charter, where the community wants this kind of tourism in our own space. We do not want that kind of tourism that only builds structures and guest houses and this and that. Those are good in terms of infrastructure, but what kind of activities do we want here? What actually syncs with the local landscape? And what is actually there that we want to actually tell stories about? It is not that someone actually comes with a gaze from the outside and looks at our landscape and goes away. Without the stories that the local people say, this kind of a gaze from the outside does not really mean anything. And combined with the gaze from the outside and the stories from the inside, that is the intercultural exchange that community-based tourism or inclusive tourism needs to take forward. And that is what I feel is what we have been committed to. We have been also talking to communities, because tourism has many ill-intended effects as well, unintended impacts also, and intended impacts also. So that we do not have another layer of conflict in an already conflict-ridden Northeast India, we are actually bringing in this kind of debates into the picture. Thank you.
No, that's a great, I mean, great insight, Dr. Mirza. So, would you like to elaborate a little further, actually, in terms of the indigenous knowledge and what exactly we are planning to do with respect to Northeast India to develop this kind of community-based tourism, where that, as you have said, it doesn't really serve purpose as someone coming from outside with pure commercial agenda. I mean, commercial agenda is good, you need money to run anything, but that cannot be the only agenda, and you completely ignore the actual community whose landscapes actually you are encroaching, or landscapes you are using to develop the ecotourism activities, and eventually they are not getting anything out of that. They remain poor as poor they were. Some other people are making money, and again the purpose of ecotourism is also getting defeated because the objective is only making money. So I remember that you and I had a conversation a long time back that there are some special projects actually was focused on Northeast India to involve more community in the ecotourism activities, and right now also you have given some insight about that. So if you like to elaborate further on that.
Yeah, the traditional knowledge, by that I mean that how the landscape is seen, in a sense,
Mhm.
in terms of how the rivers are seen, how the forests are seen, how the community spaces are seen. For example, you give the example of Zero Valley. The
Right,
community forest that is there in Zero Valley is not only a kind of a bamboo forest, right?
right.
For the outside gaze, it could only seem to be a kind of a bamboo forest where you could actually walk through, and it's similar to what we also see, for example, in Japan, and the bamboo forest in Japan, and many similar parallels have been drawn. But what what distinguishes the impact of the indigenous knowledge system is that you talked about the human element, you also talked about the non-human element,
Yeah.
which are animals, in national parks, and your book also says a lot about the non-human. But there is also this other than human, that those are the spirits which
Mhm,
govern the forest,
mhm.
which govern the bamboo forest, for example. Unless and until you take the permission of the spirits to
Yeah.
enter the community forest, the local people do not enter the forest,
Mhm.
and that is the kind of, sacredness that is associated with the forest, that is associated with the river, that is associated with the stream, and associated with the mountainside, for example. There are several mountains in Bhutan, for example, which are not allowed to be climbed. And
Right.
why is that so? It is because the mountain is sacred to the community,
Mhm.
and that is the spirit that governs that kind of space. And these are other than human kind of, beings.
Mhm.
And that kind of respect to other than human, the non-human, and the other than human are closely weaved together to actually bring together this traditional knowledge systems which communities have lived for generations and have passed through generations through their oral history. So in that sense, it is very important to understand that sanctity, and then only you will be able to appreciate the forest when you go to Zero Valley, for example. Unless and until you don't get that story or that
Mhm.
aspect of the spirits, and how a kind of permission is required, and the communities also understand that these are the protecting deities,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
is protecting our forests, our sacred groves. In Meghalaya, you must have heard about the sacred groves. There are water spirits also. So in that sense, you have to understand the whole gamut of worldviews. There is a different worldviews. These are the class of worldviews. A common tourist coming from different part of India or different part of the world into indigenous land will have a particular kind of a worldview, and the community also has a particular kind of worldview. When these two worldviews meet, there has to be kind of an intercultural exchange. But often it happens that it is this conversation does not happen at all, and such conversations will only happen through a slow-based, responsible, community-driven tourism, and that is something that many people in northeast of India are working towards.
Right, that is interesting. That there is a what I can understand from you, and I myself also witnessed, especially in the Zero Valley, especially or in the other part where the Apatanis are living, actually in Arunachal Pradesh. They also witnessed that there's a belief systems. So that belief systems may not be explained, or cannot be explained in the conventional science which we urban people are trained in, or probably believe or taught. However, that belief systems plays a very strong role in continuing their traditional knowledge systems, preventing them destroying nature, realizing them actually that they just need to depend upon natural resources, but only that much what they really need, not more than that, so that nature and all kind of beings thrive together. So that belief systems in deities with protecting forest and nature definitely help in that. Not just Northeast India, I have seen these in the Western Ghats also, especially in the Coorg area. They call Devera Kauda, the Coogs. Many Coorg actually almost destroyed by tea and coffee estates since British period, Western Ghats. But still, there are patches of forest which are thriving around those tea and coffee estates, which are habitat actually many endangered, critical endangered animals, just because of this belief system, Devara Kauda, which is nothing but the deity who protects the Western Ghats. You cannot take a single thing of the forest, cannot cut a branch of a tree, or cannot pluck a leaf. uh, you know, if you do that, then Devara Kauda will get offended and you may be cursed. So that belief system helps in that. So in continuation with that theory, Dr. Mirza, that we know that in around 2023, World Economic Forum published a report uh, titled as Embedding Indigenous Knowledge in the Conservation and Restoration of Landscapes. And in that report, it's very clearly mentioned that indigenous people play a very crucial role in protecting biodiversity across the world. There are probably 5% indigenous people who make up the entire human population of the world, but they are responsible for protecting 80% or more than 80% remaining biodiversity of the world. So that 5% people actually protect 80% biodiversity of the world. So in this context, Dr. Mirza, what you think actually, if we talk particularly about Northeast India and various indigenous people of Northeast India, then what your view, their specific roles, if you can give some examples, from that area in terms of conservation of nature uh, and overall their role in sustainability.
Yeah, I think the whole modern concept of conservation is also quite flawed, as you also have mentioned in your book. Uh, in that sense, it's a very, very top-down view of looking at conservation,
Mhm.
But how do we encounter real examples of conservation or coexisting, you know, uh, in a sense, is a very, very, uh, view from the bottom.
Mm.
And it actually negotiates and navigates several aspects in community life, in social life. Um, and these aspects has a very, very, kind of a horizontal view instead of a vertical top-down view.
Mhm.
And that kind of a conservation navigates and negotiates a lot of the challenges that we see in daily life.
Mm.
And in daily community life is not as rosy as you actually see. There are a lot of things that communities encounter, which are, for example, floods in Assam,
Mhm.
landslides in the monsoon. You saw the flash floods that happened in Sikkim, which
Right.
actually took down an entire dam project. like the Chungthang Dam that was washed away, you know. So in the monsoons, people don't come, to these spaces. In the
Right.
winter time, people come to these spaces and look at the kind of views. But in the point is this, that with more and more kind of the aspect of conservation and national parks that are being brought in, the indigenous communities are seen to be taken out of the whole picture. Animals have been taken away systematically from Northeast India. You know, um, and one very very important thing to understand, that forest has a specific a particular characteristic. When we call something as a forest, it has the human element, the non-human element, and the other than human element,
Mm.
which I spoke about, spirits,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
If these three elements are not there, this is not forest, right? In Nagaland, if the mithun is, for example, not there, that is not a forest.
Right.
And in Arunachal Pradesh, the mithun is also is a semi-bovine animal, and that is something that is the pulse of the forest,
Mm.
the spirit of the forest. And if those characteristics are not there, it is a plantation.
Right.
you know so plantations are not forests, which the government sometimes thinks makes us think. you know dam sites are not lakes, and plantations are not forests. So in that sense, a lot of infrastructure viewpoints in Meghalaya, um, where you actually go to a viewpoint and see a fall and then come back, without, just false hopping in Meghalaya does not mean that you have actually visited Meghalaya.
Right.
So if you don't go into a village, you don't spend time there, you don't understand the local culture, you don't understand the food basket of the space, what kind of crops are grown there, you know, uh, what kind of diversity is there in that. So all of these combined, brings the characteristic of any space. And all these spaces are also very, very connected spaces. You cannot disconnect the space and say that, oh, I went to Assam, or I went to Arunachal Pradesh. These are only administrative containers that you're
Right.
thinking of. Oh, I only went to Kaziranga. But the point is that all of these spaces are very, very connected. And if one space is affected, a lot of other spaces will also get affected. So all of these also needs to be seen as ecotourism in an eco-region. So sometimes we also have to understand the eco-regional and the bio-regional aspect, um, which is very, very profoundly connected to ecotourism and community-based tourism and community-driven tourism. I have a very serious problem with actually using this ecotourism, because it is so much abused and so much used and all of that. But I always also qualify it with how community-based tourism, at a certain point of time, there was a lot of community-based tourism, but it was all based on, it was more seen as imposed. But if it is community-driven, and that is something that, a community-owned tourism, that is something more meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely agree. And then probably what is coming up actually from what you have just said, that this conversation, that communities feeling for the forest, communities belief systems for the forest, communities dependence and communities engagement with the forest need to be understood by the participants in ecotourism activities. So that conversation probably is not really part of the offerings of most of the ecotourism packages we have, the traditional ecotourism packages. Their things are there to go and see, maybe even stay with them, and maybe even eating the same food what they eat. But whether that conversation is happening with them, that whether they believe how they look the forest, what are their perspective of the forest, and whether as a participant of the ecotourism activity we are able to understand that and we are aligning with that or not. Probably that things are not happening consciously, at least. And and that is probably a major missing link in the current ecotourism practices which we are doing, especially in those areas in Northeast India, where it was totally community run area, and community are totally dependent on forest, where you go for ecotourism. Do you think so? uh,
I think, yeah, in the sense that how the government is pushing tourism in this space, is something which is mass-based tourism,
Mm.
and the Northeast India is not ready for that kind of a mass-based tourism, nor it will be ever be ready. But
That's interesting.
mass-based tourism is already happening in Meghalaya, is already happening in Assam,
Mm.
where people also, for take the example of Bhutan, where Bhutan has a policy of
Right.
regulating tourism
Absolutely.
and does not want numbers,
Yeah.
but also wants a high value,
Yeah.
just wants to offer the high value instead of the high volume.
Right.
We being adjacent, geographical space,
Mm.
India being a adjacent geographical space to Bhutan, we have to learn a lot from Bhutan, you
Yeah.
know, where there is a lot of mutual respect that community-based tourism is built upon.
Mm.
Uh, that mutual respect and the acknowledgement of indigenous knowledge,
Mm.
and that acknowledgement has not really come to pass in Indian context. When wherever we go to Australia, for example, or in Canada, or in some parts of the US, these indigenous knowledge systems are very well acknowledged and are also remembered, you
Mm.
know, and also many people also start a statement saying that we stand in the lands of the indigenous communities, and it is because of them that we are actually being able to be here today. So that kind of a system, that kind of a worldview has not existed in the Indian context. And I think that needs to be there in acknowledgement to how communities look at these spaces. For example, the communities in many communities in Northeast India look at the forest as an elderly person.
Mm.
How we look at our elderly, uh, how our elders.
Yeah.
So once we actually see this connection with someone as an elderly person with the forest, the whole equation changes. It is
True.
how we treat our parents or our grandparents or our ancestors. So similarly with rivers, how river is seen as a mother river. It is also in Indian context that many rivers are seen as mother rivers, but how that spirituality and sacredness is actually associated. And even small streams have spirits, for example, in Meghalaya. And there is not only, these are not only inbuilt conservation mechanism within the community, you know, but these are out of reverence. These are also out of fear. You know,
True.
um,
Yeah.
with the advent of social media today, we see during the peak monsoon season the raging waterfalls and the raging rivers and the destruction that nature is doing, and it has gone to many people around the world. But these are the very aspects. This is the side of nature, that nature has its own mood, and its own fury, and we have to submit to that, and we move as nature needs us to move. We don't move nature as we want the nature to move. That is the
Absolutely.
whole difference in understanding, and that is the whole difference in the worldviews that we need to acknowledge in order to be able to sustainably living together. And that requires not only in reports from UN agencies or agencies from the World Economic Forum, but we need a unlearning and a de-learning of our traditional and a relearning of our traditional knowledge systems. These mainstream tourism practices needs to be unlearned
Hmm.
because these have dominated our thinking. We have to actually become more responsible travelers than be tourists actually coming in and feeding into this mass tourism hysteria.
No, that's I totally agree on this, and I agree that the analogy you have drawn, by giving the examples of Bhutan. I have traveled across length and breadth of Bhutan. Actually, I have seen, that how the over tourism has been controlled by policies, by government policies. Although there are a little bit of changes are happening in recent times, but still it is predominantly a kind of the focus is actually the quality, not the volume, as you have mentioned. And we are seeing in the Western country also, Spain is going, the people of Spain are going on the road basically to 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 saying that there should not be any tourism on their land. It has become that kind of that kind of reaction actually you're getting from that. So one thing before we get into our last question of the session, one thing I'd like to know from you, because you made a very interesting comment that the mass tourism, we are seeing mass tourism in Meghalaya and Assam. Indeed, I have seen in Meghalaya what is happening there. And to grow tourism, you need infrastructure, and to build infrastructure, they're destroying all the hills. The two reasons for that: one is growing infrastructure, another is getting the limestone mining, the quarries, all those things. And if hills are not there, then you have no reason to go to Meghalaya, honestly. I mean, you have no reason actually to enjoy ecotourism in Meghalaya if the hills are not there. So it's a kind of vicious cycle. You want to more infrastructure, you are destroying hills, and you are destroying the reasons for being in Meghalaya for ecotourism purposes. So those things anybody can witness if people go there, actually, right? But you mentioned one thing, that Northeast India will be never ready for mass tourism. Would you please elaborate on that, actually, that what the thought process behind that, and why do you think so? Kind of,
I think we need to actually understand that the appreciation of the landscape in northeast of India, and the culture, and the diversity of food and the languages, and
yeah,
the history, the rich history as well, can only be appreciated by a slow brand of tourism, you
mm,
know,
mm,
and not by the mass tourism, which is driven by selfies and Instagram videos, you know.
yeah,
And we have to understand this, that these are spaces within India where this kind of tourism is possible. We are already seeing the effect of mass tourism in Himachal Pradesh. We are
right,
actually seeing the
absolutely,
effect of mass tourism in Uttarakhand,
yeah,
Bihar,
yeah,
in many places.
yeah,
We are,
Central India, yeah,
yeah. So we have to learn from those experiences. If we do not learn from experiences within our own country, where will we learn from? If
true,
we do not learn from experiences or good best practices from Bhutan, where do we learn from? Do we bring in consultants from Europe, or we bring in consultants from the US to actually teach us what tourism means? We know how to actually present our culture. We know how, for example, the Assamese gamusa, which is the mark of the traditional, symbol of
yeah,
Assam,
yeah.
is no longer produced in Assam.
Really?
And produced in Gujarat, in factories in Gujarat. You know?
You mean that the gamucha, Assamese gamucha, we all know, actually,
Yeah,
the Assamese, whenever you go,
yeah,
they greet you by presenting that, and every Assamese
yeah.
kind of put that on
Mm,
the neck. That no
mm.
longer are produced in Assam, it get produced in Gujarat.
So the ones that are actually used for tourism to greet people are mostly bought from the cheaper varieties, are all made now from factories in Gujarat. And
Okay.
because there is so much of over tourism,
Yeah,
there's so much of over, so if you go to Mazuli, for example, you would
yeah,
see on the looms those gamusas are made.
yeah,
That is the real meaning of the gamusa,
yeah,
where actually a local community has actually made it in their spare time, from their fields, where between their harvest, when they get spare time, they make those weaves. In Nagaland, if you go, a Naga shawl is
mm,
made only when the person or the lady has a time between the harvest to make those.
right,
That
right,
was the whole concept of
right.
weaves,
Yeah.
weaving.
They do not
uh,
do commercial
yeah,
production. They do
yeah.
when
So in
they want
commercial
to do it.
production,
Yeah,
all of these are made in factories and all of
right,
that, and this at one point of time are then taken out of, a lot of the muga silk, and a lot of things are now being replaced by yarn from Thailand and from Southeast Asia. All of these things are, these are very, very important cultural symbols.
mm,
These are what actually determines a particular space. And if you do not get the real thing, when you're actually coming in for, you're spending your money definitely and coming here. If you don't see that kind of a value,
mm,
and only see crowds, and have to always be in a queue to actually enter a waterfall, or or something, a space, or always keep on paying everywhere you want to get into. This is a gating gating of spaces.
Yeah.
This is the gating of spaces, how our gated communities are there in urban cities.
Right.
This gating, I was there in Kashmir recently last year, and I saw that there was this kind of valleys in Pahalgam, which was a Beta Valley, and there was some other valley, Aru Valley. All of these valleys are all gated valleys. How can a valley be gated? Because that valley itself is now becoming a source of income, and
Yeah.
a very, very narrow understanding of a valley has emerged because of tourism. And that is soon going to come into Northeast India,
Mm.
where everything is going to be gated. A waterfall is going to be gated. A landscape is going to be gated in Meghalaya. Would you like that kind of a space to come in? And if you have the tourism in the ministries or the departments in respective states, if you follow their kind of a thing, they will actually soon have this kind of things in place.
Mm.
So this is the whole gating of spaces, where we need to actually see the geographical spaces in its own uniqueness, in its own kind of raw power and raw beauty, in a sense. So in that sense, it should be also be left that communities will never want this kind of a gating system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
that is a very, very important fundamental problem of how ecotourism is actually produced in India.
absolutely. And these honestly, Dr. Mirza, these analogy between gated community of urban area and what is happening actually, this the getting of all the ecotourism destination is actually quite uh, scary. Actually, it's a matter of concern, because people who understand the the sociology and the science of sustainability, they know that this kind of gated concept will definitely defeat the purposes in every aspect. It will not just push community behind actually the whole all the sustainability development goals related to our community, and then poverty, and then hunger, everything will be defeated. Not just that, all the climate actions and the biodiversity related goals which we have will get defeated for sure if we take this approach. And ecotourism, which is supposed to revive, will actually act exactly the opposite way. It will actually cause more destruction than revival of community, or revival of the conservation, the revival of the nature. And that's a very alarming message I'm getting from you today, Dr. Mirza. It's alarming, but it is very timely. I think it should reach to more the maximum number of people possible, especially people who are actively involved in ecotourism and aspiring to involve in ecotourism. So one last question, Dr. Mirza, uh, that if want to give advice, because you are subject matter experts of this field, and not just that, you travel a lot across that geography, actually not just limited within India, even the surrounding countries also. You traveled a lot, you have made a lot of tourists and a lot of travelers. So what general advice you have for them, for the people, in order to be more responsible participant in the tourism activity or ecotourism activity?
I think the sharing of stories and the time is very important.
Mhm.
Many people don't have the time nowadays to travel responsibly. I think it's all the whole running after itineraries, and suddenly coming in with a kind of a bucket list kind of a syndrome. That I need to check these things out. And this kind of traveling is actually wasting your money. You know it's just not having a good experience. You need to actually kind of space where you can actually really relax, and then understand the fabric of the space, to be able to weave your own stories, uh, and get something back from there. And I think that kind of an experience is what you should seek. Go anywhere in the world. I think it's not only about Northeast India. I think I also myself travel quite a lot, and
Yeah.
I also am interested in photography. And I always make it a point that I spend time, and time is the most important thing. You know, time in the sense of not weeks, but time in the sense of iterated time. You also visit one place for many times. You always see a different time, a different face of that space. you know so in that sense, I think these are multiple encounters by which you actually form. And as one person who have studied landscapes has very rightly said, that a landscape is not only what you see, it's by memory, is how you associate your memory with that landscape, and that combination is the understanding of that landscape. And that is how you should see, even if it is being a forest, or you go to a kind of what you call a park, for example, a national park, for example, which are gated against spaces, control spaces. So all of these rivers, for example, mountains, valleys, all of these are all in relation to your particular unique thinking, is how you actually form that landscape in your mind. And for
So
Arnab, it is a different
yeah,
landscape. For me, it's a different landscape. We read it
absolutely,
differently. And that
absolutely.
is how it should actually go forward.
No, that's a well articulated suggestions, especially the time. That definitely. I mean, if you want to experience the ecotourism, special ecotourism, which are developed around indigenous people, then just having the bucket list approach will not serve the purpose. You have to go there. You have to give time. You have to align your feeling with their feelings. You have to understand their stories. You have to understand their perspectives, and at the same time probably you need to go back again and again. Definitely you cannot go there and leave. I mean, people, normal participants on ecotourisms, probably they have a day job. Definitely they have a day job, so they cannot go there for a year, but they might need to go back again and again to make up actually the time which that place demands, to understand the how the community are associated with nature and how they're contributing, and then your ecotourism purposes is getting fulfilled. So these suggestions are well taken actually, and thanks for this conversation, Dr. Mirza. We have few participants. If you have any questions for Dr. Mirza or for me, please feel free to unmute yourself, or to switch on your video, and please feel free to ask Dr. Mirza any questions if you have. That Would you like to share any kind of your interesting encounter when you have traveled as a tourist, as a traveler? I mean, I know that most of your tourism has probably a research purposes associated with that, but nevertheless, you are tourists, like maybe as a researcher or as a leisure tourist, whatever. But any kind of interesting encounter you would like to share from that part of the world, that part of our country, which you always find a mysterious part of our country, the northeast part of our country, or maybe the surrounding geopolitical area outside our country, maybe, if you have anything to talk
Oh,
about.
I think, I have traveled in Meghalaya once, and I was going on a trek to one of these root steps
Yeah.
that are there in the forest. They're root bridges, but there are also root steps. You know, Well, I was going with some friends actually on that trek. Um, it was going to rain actually, and we were going up, and we thought that we will just come down. Even if it rains, it should not be a big problem. uh, and there were some villagers who were actually winding up their work and coming back and saying that, and were telling us that, there is going to be rain very soon, you know and and there are very different kinds of rain that in Meghalaya that people talk about. Some rains do not stop for 21 days. They keep on going on for 21 days. Some rains will not stop without taking a life. Some rains will be only very little, which only will chase away goats, which is the goat chasing rain. Or some will only chase cows, which the cows will go in. And
Okay.
then, so intensity of rains are also associated with animals. So in that sense, we were going there, and the villagers told us that you might have difficulty coming down. And we said that, oh, why should we have difficulty coming down? It is always difficult to climb up, So since we have already climbed up, and all we have to do is to come down, we can actually bear the rain. So we stayed through the rain. We look at the living zone, and when we're coming down, we realized that they were correct. We had to literally be on all our fours, while you're coming down. You're so slippery, and that was the only day that I almost literally talked to every stone, every step, that will you hold me, will you hold me, will you hold me? And that was the conversation that I had with these steps, which I'll never forget, and that is something that we also sometimes realize, that when we go into a space, it is very important to respect local knowledge.
Yeah.
If someone is saying that it will have difficulty coming back, we should actually return.
Yeah.
So these are things which are very, very important, and we should not have this kind of a ego or the kind of audacity, or that kind of what we call that we can do,
Arrogance.
we
Yeah.
can do anything in nature.
We can do
Yeah.
anything with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so because people have lived through those kind of landscapes for generations, and have passed knowledge through generations, and that knowledge is important. And how things can turn up, we hear of a lot of accidents around in different parts, is just by simply because people don't listen, and that has become a very big menace now. And wherever we go, we actually see that people think that they are their own guides, and they can do whatever they want, and can go wherever they want. And that is something that is actually destroying the value for different people like us as well, who are more responsive and want to listen keenly to nature. Yeah.
Okay,
And
Dr. Mirza, thanks for sharing this. Actually, that's quite interesting. And you are an experienced trekker. I know that. If you had experienced that, then you had to crawl literally on four limbs and pray to the stones that please hold me. Then we could imagine that other people what they can have. We have couple of hand rise actually. I think Sravanti raised her hand, and Suresh also raised his hand. So Sravanti, if you go first, and you can ask your questions, and then Suresh, you can go later.
Hi, thank you so much, Arnab, for inviting me for this beautiful podcast. And thank you so much, Dr. Mirza, for giving us such a beautiful insight and experience. And the trekking thing, I was literally getting goosebumps because I was trying to put myself in your shoes and trying to imagine that unstoppable rain, and when you are literally coming down in your four limbs and talking to every stone to hold you. So this teaches a very simple lesson, or maybe my takeaway is, first, definitely you said listen to the locals because they are the original people of that area. And second, being a mindful person, being a mindful human being, or being a mindful living being, like whether it's a dog, cat, we have a lot to learn from these animals. I myself, being a rescuer and a community feeder, animal feeder, I have learned this, that we humans have forgotten one thing, that's being mindful. So this year during the summers, there were a lot of flock of people literally went to Meghalaya, and the Instagram and the social media was full of their pictures and everything. And then the impact on that beautiful place, which was called as one of the most beautiful place, I don't know what is the situation of that place. So I think I'll pause myself to go to that place, which is beautiful and it is more sustainable terms in terms of their lifestyle of sustainability is 100% to learn from there. And also before going to that place, I personally feel that I should continue the practice of sustainable lifestyle, which I'm doing in a city like Bangalore.
Governments, and since you mentioned Bhutan, now what is Bhutan doing? What can we take from that set that we can do and perhaps apply what may fail here? And I think the most responsible way to take your knowledge forward would be to apply all this in a small area, a particular zone, and then see if it works or doesn't work. Otherwise, we're still working, or we are just talking at the level of cliche. Sorry if I'm so for being so blunt, but I mean I think we need to move forward now.
So, Sanjukta, your network is good now for asking the questions.
I completely echo your stories of Meghalaya specifically, since I'm from that place. I'm born and raised there, been out with friends in my childhood, and also seen the difference. What has it changed in the society? My question or my understanding is, since I'm not from this background too, so but I'm an economics fellow, so I want to understand. I have seen those changes happening in the society in Shillong, for example, how economics or the commercial growth have actually taken the beauty of that particular place into a jeopardy. Like trees have been cut in. If you see the Dauki Road, for example, the entire T strot has been cut for a national highway. I know an infrastructure development is key towards the nation development, but is there a formula or a thing which you guys can think of where the ecosystem can also be retained along with the economic upliftment, like a sustainable point of view? I am just trying to understand if there's any idea about this.
Sure, that's a very effective question actually. How ecosystem can also be retained while developing the infrastructures. Question basically that the Savanti asked actually what we can do actually to be more mindfulness, in terms of participating in ecotourism, or participating of living in this planet as a whole. Of course, Suresh's questions were more direct, that whether there is any policy recommendation, what we can learn from Bhutan and how we can implement that. And the third questions from Subhati was that how ecosystem can also be retained while continuing, economic development. The age-old questions of sustainable development, basically, how we strike the balance. Yes. So if you can sum up.
I think going to Shravanti's question, I think what she's doing is really commendable. It is what we understand as intergenerational sharing. That is actually what she's already doing with her children. This intergenerational sharing is very, very important. Let me give you an example from Meghalaya, where a lot of youth actually, at one point of time, say 15 years back, did not care about how to understand how living root bridges are built, But in the last 15 to 20 years, the amount of interest in living root bridges has grown so much that they are now going back to their elders in order to understand how to actually build living root bridges, So the young generation was not learning this thing, but is now going back and interested in learning that. And that is something that is a positive that has happened at a community level, So this intergenerational sharing is very, very important. These small things matter quite a lot, in the long run. And in terms of this kind of sharing, I would go back to this question by Suresh, where in terms of policy recommendations, we have been giving this recommendation to tourism departments as community charters, from communities to the tourism departments. We have been facilitating them. There was a series of workshops which we had conducted with an organization based in Bangalore, which is Equations, where we had actually brought together a lot of stakeholders from different parts of the country. And there was a conversation, a kind of an intercultural conversation between these stakeholders as to what was actually working in different parts of, for example, in Ladakh, for example, in Munsiari, in Sundarbans, in Meghalaya, in Majuli, in Jorhat, in Kaziranga, all of these places, these kind of exchange visits we have been facilitating, which will actually bring about a kind of a critical understanding in order for communities to be prepared to actually present these memorandums and present these findings themselves to the departments which are concerned with tourism. Because tourism is a double-edged sword. It can also benefit, and it also can cut, have negatives. So I think in terms of, it is rightly taken that there should be policy things, and we are also trying to facilitate more interactions between Bhutan and Assam, for example, and Bhutan and Meghalaya. These are things that are in motion, and many organizations are actually enabling and facilitating this kind of conversations at the community level. We only can hope to actually present memorandums to the government. It is up to them for them to listen. We have been writing papers on these issues for some time. And as going to the question that was earlier asked by Sanjukta and her husband, uh, in that sense, as you have grown up in Sri Lanka and you see the tremendous change, there is this whole thing of copying a kind of a certain kind of trend. You know, in Meghalaya, the tourism industry has tremendously exploded in the last 10-15 years, and everyone is now opening up a guest house, and everyone is opening up a homestay. You know, everyone is copying the other, because everyone is only doing a kind of a plantation-based kind of tourism. It is not that the diversity of activities that can be done in a particular space has been negated by this mass-based tourism, entry of mass-based tourism in Meghalaya. You know, so we are here to also share our experiences from what we have seen in Northeast of India. We are not claiming to actually solve everything in a particular time. We are trying towards that. We are trying, giving our recommendations to whatever stakeholders we are possible. And at the same time, we are also continuously talking to communities, because that is very, very important. If the communities also give up on this, then we will have nothing left with us. So in that sense, this kind of, the possibilities of people in a village not only opening homestays but doing other things also has been negated. Tourism has become mass because everyone is opening a homestay, and that is also part of the problem. So in that sense, the investments that they're making in this kind of homestays are not fetching those returns that actually they hoped 10 years back. And then there is a sense of frustration that comes in. There was this COVID period when a lot of people, a lot of youngsters in the villages in Meghalaya could not go back to the farms because they never learned the ways of the farming. Because there was a period when a lot of these youngsters could actually earn a lot of quick money through being guides. You know, now the village actually has taken a firm stand that if you have not completed your studies, you will not be able to go and guide a tourist. You know, and that is a change that has actually come about through a lot of consultations and a lot of discussions at the community level. Now in a village like Molinong, no youth can actually go and become a guide unless and until that person has actually completed their studies or have actually spent considerable time in the farm with their parents to actually learn the ways of farming. Because when a certain thing like COVID strikes, you actually have no option but to rely back on your farms. Tourism is very fickle-minded as well. Suddenly a conflict happens or something like a pandemic happens, tourism will stop immediately.
Yeah.
So we need to also prepare that over-dependence on tourism is also very difficult, you know, and there are different aspects also which are actually, we always understand that Meghalaya is a, one of the wettest places in earth, you know, a lot of rainfall, but we also don't understand that it also has drought in the winter months, you know.
Yes.
The demands on water that the communities want for themselves and the tourists want in a particular village is also creating conflicts now.
Yeah.
So we have to look at a lot of issues, and all of these issues are now being actively discussed. And I'm sure that this also happens in Himachal. This also happens in other parts. I have seen it in Myanmar, for example, where local communities have to fetch waters from longer distances because hotels have taken up and guest houses have taken up the water sources which are available in the villages. So in that sense, we also have to prepare ourselves so that we don't have this kind of additional layers of conflict. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Mirza. I mean, and thanks for all the participants actually for your patient listening and asking excellent questions, especially Sravanti, Suresh, Sangjukta, and Sangjukta's husband, Subharti. So this kind of question actually kind of added more value, and Dr. Mirza, because of your question, actually Dr. Mirza could share even more meaningful insight actually, because he is the one who is directly involved in not just the research work but also advisory work in policy making, especially the tourism and the other social aspects, community development in Northeast India. So it's an honor, Dr. Mirza, to have you in our evening podcast and listening to you. And we would end our today's podcast. And in future, again, we'll be organizing many such podcasts on the relevant issues, especially on the issues of sustainability and ecotourism. And we'd like to host you again, probably at some point of time with some other issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And please read Arnav's book. And it's a very insightful book. And I recommend this to everyone.